The bars rattled like teeth in a skull the moment Jedediah Fletcher's lantern swung too close, and a green-skinned hand shot through the gap to seize his wrist before he could step back. "You are new," the orc woman said, her voice low and rough as river stone, though there was something almost amused beneath the menace. "The others flinch before they even see me clearly. You only flinched after." Jedediah did not pull away, though every instinct screamed at him too. Her grip was iron, her knuckles scarred, and up close in the lantern light her eyes were a deep amber, sharp as a hawk's. "Maybe I flinch on my own schedule," he said, and was surprised his voice came out steady. She laughed, short and startled, as if she had not expected a joke from him. Then she let go of his wrist, slow and deliberate, the way a predator releases something it has decided is not worth killing yet. He stepped back out of arm's reach and set the lantern on its hook beside the cell door, hands trembling only a little now that hers were gone. This was his first night on watch outside the holding cell at the back of the Greylock Landing jailhouse, and already he understood why the last two guards had asked to be reassigned. "Yash Earthshaker," he said, reading the name from the ledger the magistrate had given him, though he did not need the ledger. Everyone in the lake country had heard the name by now, whispered across the docks and the trading post and the tavern. The orc woman the militia had dragged in 3 days past, caught fording the shallows above Greylock with a stolen skiff and a knife at her belt. "You say my name wrong," she said, settling back against the stone wall of her cell, arms crossing over a fitted bodice of dark, weathered travel leather, laced tight up the front and worn soft at the shoulders from years of pack straps and bowstrings. Her trousers were the same supple hide, cinched at the waist with a wide belt that had once held a hatchet and a hunting knife, both confiscated the night she was caught. Even sitting in a cage with dried mud still on her boots, she looked less like a prisoner and more like something merely resting between battles. "Earthshaker," she corrected, drawing the syllables apart like she was breaking a stick over her knee. "Not Earthshaker. You humans always swallow the middle of words." "My apologies," Jedediah said, and meant it, because something in him did not want to get it wrong again. She studied him a long moment, head tilted, the lantern light catching the small silver ring through the top of one ear, tusks just visible at the corners of her mouth when she almost smiled. "You are the fur man," she said suddenly. "Fletcher. I have heard your name at the trading fires. Uzga Earthshaker's daughter does not forget a debt, and my mother speaks of your father like he was kin." Jedediah's chest tightened at that because it was true, and because it was the entire reason the magistrate had put him at this door instead of some harder man with a crossbow and no history with the clans. "Your mother saved my father's life," he said quietly. 11 years ago, in the flash flood on the Kelset Run, when his wagon went into the river. Her warband pulled him out. I still carry the debt marker she pressed into his hand. Yash's expression shifted, something unreadable crossing it, gone before he could name it. "Then it is strange," she said, "that her son now stands guard over her daughter's cage." He had no answer for that. He only knew that when Magistrate Prout had called for a guard who spoke enough Orcish to keep the prisoner calm, and who would not put a blade through her out of fear, every man in Greylock Landing had looked at Jedediah Fletcher, the quiet fur trader who ranged deep into orc country twice a year and always came back with pelts and stories, and more than once, orc friends he traded fair with. He had not asked for this post. He had simply been the only man in the village the orcs trusted even a little, and the only man who trusted them back. "I did not ask to be assigned here," he told her, "but I am here now." "Then we understand each other already," Yash said, and there was something like approval in the way she said it, though her eyes never left his face, weighing him the way a trader weighs a pelt for hidden rot. Jedediah had come to the lake country 3 years running now, hauling packs of trade goods up through the pine ridges into orc territory, and coming back laden with beaver, marten, and the strange silvered lynx, pelts the mountain clans prized. He had learned enough of the tongue to bargain fair, had shared enough fires to be trusted with a bowl of stew, and a place to sleep among strangers who had every reason to hate his kind. The wars between men and orcs were not so old that either side had forgotten them, only old enough that a careful few, like Jedediah, had found a narrow path of peace worth walking. He was 31 years old, unmarried, with no family left in Greylock Landing but a widowed aunt who fretted over him, and a debt token of carved elk bone that he kept on a thong beneath his shirt, the same token his father had worn until the day he died. He had grown used to being alone. He had not grown used to a voice like Yash Earthshaker's finding its way under his skin in one night. He should have known, from the very first night, that this posting was going to undo him entirely. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that the village found ordinary and Jedediah found anything but. He brought her meals twice a day, bread and dried fish, and whatever the tavern could spare, and at first she would not eat in front of him, turning her face to the wall until he left the tray and stepped back to his post. By the third day she had stopped bothering with the pretense. "Your bread is terrible," she informed him around a mouthful of it the fourth morning, sitting cross-legged on the cell floor with the tray balanced on her knee. "Flat as a paddle and twice as heavy." "It's what the tavern makes," Jedediah said, leaning against the door frame, arms folded, feeling more at ease in her presence with each day that the magistrate's decision about her fate remained undecided. "You are welcome to bake your own if they will give you a fire and flour." "If they gave me a fire I would burn this whole rotted jailhouse down," she said, but there was no true heat in it, only a kind of weary humor, and she glanced at him sideways to see if he understood the joke. He did. He laughed, and something in her face eased at the sound. It was on the sixth night, when the rest of the village had gone quiet and only the lake wind moved through the shutters, that she told him why she had run. "I am promised," she said, not looking at him, her hands working idly at a fraying thread on her cuff. "Promised to Grosk Ironjaw of the Ironjaw clan. It was decided by the elders, my mother among them, to end the feud over the northern fishing grounds. Ironjaw Warband has raided our nets 3 summers running. A marriage binds the clans, ends the killing. That is the arithmetic of it. And you did not want it," Jedediah said. "It was not a question." "I have met Grosk Ironjaw twice," she said. "Once he broke a man's jaw at a gathering for spilling ale on his boots. Once he told my mother to her face that a woman's worth was measured by the strength of the sons she gave a clan." Her jaw tightened, tusks catching the lantern light. "I am Yash Earthshaker. I have led raiding parties since I was 20 winters old. I have killed men who thought a woman could not hold a spear steady. I will not be handed to that man like a fattened elk to seal a treaty I had no voice in making. So you ran." "So I ran," she agreed, "through human land because the Ironjaw scouts would have caught me on any orc trail within 2 days. I did not think your militia would take me for a raider and drag me into a cage for the crime of crossing a river in a stolen boat." Jedediah was quiet a moment, turning the whole shape of it over in his mind. A woman fleeing one cage only to be thrown into another, and the 2 men who might decide her fate, Magistrate Prout weighing the reward Ironjaw's clan had already offered for her return, and Grosk Ironjaw himself, who, according to the rumors running the docks, was already 3 days' ride south and coming to collect what he considered rightfully his. "I am sorry," he said, and it came out rower than he intended. Yash looked up at him then, really looked, and something in her amber eyes softened in a way he had not yet seen. "You did not put me here, Fletcher." "No, but I could take you out of it." The words left him before he had decided to say them, and he heard himself say them with a kind of distant shock, as if some other, braver man had spoken through his mouth. She went very still. "Do not say such things unless you mean them. I have had enough of men who speak pretty and do nothing." "I mean it," he said, and found that he did entirely, though he had no plan yet for how such a thing could be done without ending his life, his post, and likely his freedom in the same breath. News moved fast on the lake, faster than any man could ride, carried on the tongues of fishermen and traders and the flat-bottomed boats that crossed the water twice a day. By the 8th morning of Yash's imprisonment, the whole of Greylock Landing knew that Grosk Ironjaw's warband had made camp 2 miles upriver and was sending word ahead that their chief was coming to claim his promised bride. Along with the bounty the magistrate had already half agreed to accept in exchange for her. Jedediah heard it standing on the dock outside the trading post, buying rope for a delivery he no longer had the heart to make, and felt the news land in his stomach like a dropped stone. He found Magistrate Prout in the jailhouse office an hour later, a heavy-set man with ink-stained fingers and the permanently harried look of someone who had spent 30 years balancing peace between two peoples who each thought the other a plague. "You cannot hand her to that man," Jedediah said, before Prout had even set down his quill. "Fletcher." Prout did not look up. "It is not my place, nor yours, to decide the internal politics of the Orc clans. The Ironjaw chief offers 20 pelts of silver fox and a season's truce on the northern shore in exchange for the woman. That truce means our fishing boats are not burned this winter. You understand what that means for this village. She does not want to marry him. She is a prisoner who broke into human territory with a stolen boat and a stolen knife," Prout said, finally looking up, his eyes tired but not unkind. "What she wants was never part of the bargain, son. I am sorry for it. I am. But I have 400 souls in this village who need that truce more than they need my sympathy for one Orc woman's broken heart." Jedediah left the office with his jaw clenched so tight it ached, and did not trust himself to speak again until he reached the cell. He told her everything, standing at the bars in the gray light of early evening, and watched her face go through fury, and then something worse than fury, a flat, exhausted resignation that frightened him more than her anger ever could. "Then it is decided," Yash said quietly. "I will be given to him like a sack of grain, and my mother will call it peace." "It is not decided," Jedediah said. "Not while I am the one holding the key." She looked at him for a long moment, and he watched the resignation in her eyes give way slowly to something sharper. Hope, maybe, or calculation. Or both at once, the way hope and calculation so often lived in the same breath when a person had nothing left to lose. "Then let me out, Fletcher," she said, low, urgent, both hands wrapping around the bars now, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her breath. "Not for freedom's sake alone. I have a debt to answer and a mother to face on my own terms, not chained at the wrists in front of Grosk Ironjaw's whole warband. Let me out, and I swear on my mother's name, on the Earthshaker line, I will not run from what is owed. I will only refuse to be sold. If I do this," Jedediah said, his voice unsteady now, "I lose everything. My post, my place here. Maybe worse, if Prout decides to make an example." "I know," Yash said. "I would not ask it of a man who did not already mean what he said on the 6th night." He thought of his father's debt marker, warm against his chest beneath his shirt, of Yash Earthshaker pulling a drowning man from a flood 11 years gone, of every fire he had shared in Orc camps where he had been the only human for 100 miles and never once been afraid, because trust, once given honestly, held. He thought of Yash's face in the lantern light on the first night, sharp and unafraid even behind bars, and he understood with a clarity that frightened him that he had already decided this the moment he chose to say sorry to her instead of nothing at all. "There is a boat at the 3rd dock," he said. "It is fast, and no one watches it after dark because it is mine. If you go tonight before the moon is high, you have a chance to reach the ridge trail before Grosk's scouts see you crossing." "Come with me," Yash said, so quickly it startled them both. "They will hunt you as a fugitive and me as a traitor either way," Jedediah said. "Better they hunt us together than you alone against a warband 3 days from taking you by force." She reached through the bars again, but this time she did not seize his wrist. She simply laid her hand over his green fingers against his rough, sun-browned knuckles, and for a moment neither of them moved. "Then unlock it," she said softly. "Unlock it, Jedediah Fletcher, and whatever comes after, come after it beside me." His hands shook as he drew the iron key from his belt, and the small metal click of the lock turning seemed, in that quiet jailhouse, louder than any thunder he had ever heard in the mountains. The door swung open on its old hinge with a groan, and Yash Earthshaker stepped free of the cell for the first time in 8 days, close enough now that he could see every detail of her, the strong line of her jaw, the faint white scar above one eyebrow, the way her amber eyes held his without flinching, the same way she had held them from the very first night, only now there was no iron between them at all. "You are certain," she said, giving him one last chance to change his mind, because even now, freed, some part of her would not simply take without asking. "I have never been more certain of anything," Jedediah said, and found it was the plain truth. They went out the back of the jailhouse into the blue dark of a lake country night, past the sleeping rows of docked fishing boats and the shuttered trading post, the water lapping soft and constant against the pilings, smelling of pine resin and wet wood smoke from the last banked cookfires of the village. Jedediah's own small skiff waited at the third dock exactly where he had left it that morning, oars stowed, a coil of rope, and an oiled sack of dried meat tucked beneath the bench from habits of a trader who never left a boat unprepared. They were 3 strokes of the oar from shore when a lantern flared to life on the dock behind them, and a voice bellowed across the water. "Fletcher! Stop where you stand." It was Captain Rourke, the militia officer who had wanted the guard post for himself and lost it to a fur trader he privately called soft on orcs. He had 2 men with him, and a third was already running toward the stable where the fast horses were kept. "Row," Yash said, already reaching past him for the second oar, her strokes deep and sure despite 8 days behind bars, and the little skiff shot out into the dark water faster than Jedediah's arms alone could ever have driven it. Shouts followed them across the lake, and somewhere behind, a horse's hooves drummed hard against the dock boards, but the water was wide and the night was dark, and by the time Rourke's men had a boat of their own in the water, Jedediah and Yash were already pulling for the far shore where the ridge trail climbed up into the tree line and away from Greylock Landing entirely. They ran through that first night without stopping more than a handful of minutes at a time, following the ridge trail Jedediah knew from 3 years of trading trips, a narrow deer path that climbed above the lake and cut northeast toward the gorge, where the water funneled down into a fast river before spreading wide again into orc country beyond. Behind them, faint and getting no closer, they could hear the distant sound of dogs, and once far off, a horn blown in 3 short blasts that Yash said grimly was the militia calling in Rourke's mounted patrol. "They will not risk the ridge trail on horseback past the second switchback," she said, breathing hard but steady, moving with the same sure economy Jedediah remembered from watching hunters he respected. "Too narrow. It buys us time." "Time to reach where?" Jedediah asked, because he had followed his own instinct this far without a plan beyond the first few miles. "The rope bridge over Kelsic Gorge," Yash said. "If we cross before dawn, we are 2 hours from my mother's camp, and once we are among the Earthshaker tents, no militia patrol will follow. They fear my mother's warband more than they fear losing a bounty." It made sense, and it was the only plan either of them had, so they pushed on through the dark, climbing steadily until the trees thinned and the roar of falling water grew loud enough to swallow their own footsteps. The Kelsic Gorge Bridge had been strung across the chasm longer than Jedediah had been trading in these mountains, a narrow span of rope and split-log planking that swayed with every step and had, according to every orc who ever mentioned it to him, been due for replacement for at least 5 years. Below it, the river ran white and furious with the spring melt, dropping 40 feet onto black rocks that would leave nothing recognizable of a body unlucky enough to fall. "We go one at a time," Yash said, testing the first plank with her boot. "Slow, and to the sides where the ropes are anchored, not the center." Jedediah went first at her insistence, she staying close behind, and they were perhaps 2/3 across, the wind screaming up out of the gorge and the ancient ropes groaning beneath them, when the sound of horses reached them from the far side they had already crossed. Torches bobbed through the trees. Rourke had not stopped at the second switchback after all, or worse. This was not Rourke's patrol at all, but riders coming the other way. Irongel scouts, Yash breathed, seeing the torchlight catch on tusked helmets and a banner Jedediah did not recognize, dark cloth with a jagged white shape stitched across it. Grosk's men, they are ahead of schedule. There was no time to reverse course. The riders on the near bank had already seen them, and a shout went up, sharp and furious in the orc tongue. An arrow hissed past close enough that Jedediah felt the wind of it against his cheek. "Move!" Yash shouted, and they ran the last stretch of the bridge together, planks bucking wildly underfoot. And it was in that final desperate scramble that Jedediah heard the sound he would remember for the rest of his life. A deep, tearing groan from somewhere beneath them. Old rope fiber giving way under the combined weight and violent motion of two bodies running full out across a span never meant for such abuse. The anchor rope on the near side snapped first, a crack like a rifle shot, and the whole bridge lurched sideways and down, planks spinning loose into the void, and Jedediah felt his footing vanish entirely beneath him. He did not remember deciding to grab for her. He only remembered his hand closing around her wrist as the world tilted, and Yash's other arm hooking hard around the one remaining rope, her strength alone keeping them both from following the falling planks down into the white water 40 feet below. For one endless, screaming moment they hung suspended over the gorge, the roar of the river filling the whole world, Jedediah's boots scrabbling for purchase against nothing, his whole weight dragging against Yash's one-armed grip on a fraying rope that was never meant to hold two people at all. "Climb," Yash ground out through her teeth, muscles standing out along her arm like cords of iron. "Climb up my body, Fletcher, now, or we both go into the river." He climbed. He would be ashamed later of how undignified it was, hauling himself up along her braced form while she held them both against the pull of the gorge with nothing but sheer strength and refusal to let go. But in the moment there was no room for shame, only the desperate animal need to reach solid rock before the last rope gave. His hand found the ledge of the far bank first, fingers digging into wet stone, and he hauled himself the rest of the way up before turning back and grabbing for her with both hands, pulling with everything he had left as she scrambled the final distance, her boots finding purchase at the last second on a jut of rock that had no business being there except by whatever mercy the mountain still had to spare. They collapsed together on the far bank, both of them soaked with spray and shaking, the ruined bridge now nothing but a few torn ropes swinging uselessly over the chasm behind them. And on the other side, the Irongel scouts stared across the impassable gorge with furious, helpless frustration, their torches guttering in the wind, unable to follow. "They will have to ride 2 days around by the low ford," Yash said, when she had breath enough to speak, still lying flat on her back on the wet stone, staring up at the stars now visible through a break in the clouds. "We have bought ourselves that much at least." Jedediah lay beside her, his heart still slamming against his ribs, and found he could not stop looking at her, at the way her chest rose and fell, at the wet strands of dark hair plastered against her jaw, at the fact that she had held both their lives on the strength of one arm and one rope rather than let him fall. "You could have let me go," he said quietly. "Saved yourself the risk." Yash turned her head to look at him, amber eyes catching what little starlight there was, and something in her expression made his breath catch worse than the fall had. "I have never once in all my life considered letting you go," she said. "Not from the moment you looked at me on that first night and did not look away." They found shelter before dawn in a shallow cave above the river, more of an overhang than a true cave, but enough to break the wind, and there, wrapped in the one dry blanket from Jedediah's pack, soaked and exhausted and alive by a margin so thin it still made his hands tremble to think of, they lay close together in the dark and did not sleep. "I have never told anyone this," Yash said, after a long silence, her voice barely above the sound of the river below. "Not even my mother." When the elders announced the betrothal to Grosk, I went to the shrine stones above our camp and I prayed to be struck down rather than live it. Not because I feared him. I do not fear any man, orc, or human. I feared becoming a thing to be traded, a debt paid in flesh instead of coin. You are not a thing, Jedediah said, and his voice shook with how much he meant it. You have never once, since the night I met you, seemed like anything but the most singular, most alive person I have ever stood near. You say that, Yash murmured, but you do not know what it is to want, Fletcher. Truly want, the way I have come to want you these 8 days behind bars, watching you bring me terrible bread and terrible jokes, and never once treating me like a thing at all. The confession landed in the dark between them like a spark to dry tinder, and Jedediah felt something in his chest crack open that he had kept sealed shut for years. Through every lonely trading season, every winter spent alone with only his furs and his father's memory for company. I want you too, he said, the words rough and unpracticed, a man who had never had reason to say such things before. I have wanted you since the first night, when you grabbed my wrist and I should have been afraid, and instead all I could think was that I never wanted you to let go. Yash's hand found his face in the dark, her thumb brushing along his jaw with a gentleness that seemed impossible from hands strong enough to have held them both above a gorge. Then do not make me wait any longer to know it properly, she whispered, and closed the last distance between them herself. The kiss was nothing like Jedediah had imagined in the quiet, guilty hours of guard duty when he had let himself imagine it at all. It was fierce and searching, and a little desperate, tasting of river spray and cold night air, her hand curling into the front of his shirt to pull him closer, as if she meant to make up for 8 days of iron bars between them in a single moment. He kissed her back with everything he had, every fear and every certainty tangled together, and when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she pressed her forehead to his and let out a shaky laugh. I have fought warbends and river floods and my own mother's counsels, she said, and none of it left me half so undone as your mouth, Jedediah Fletcher. We should sleep, he said, though he made no move to put distance between them. There will be more running tomorrow. There will be running for many tomorrows yet, Yash agreed, settling against his chest as if it were the most natural place in the world for her to be. But tonight, at least, let us simply be found together instead of alone. They slept that way, tangled in the one blanket, and woke at first light to push on toward the Earthshaker camp, changed between them in some fundamental way that neither needed to name aloud. The journey to Earthshaker's camp took the better part of 2 more days, moving carefully through country Yash knew like the map of her own hands, avoiding the low ford where the Iron Joe scouts would eventually cross and skirting wide of a second militia patrol, out of Greylock Landing that Jedediah spotted from a ridge line before it ever spotted them. They ate sparingly from his trader's stores, slept close together each night beneath the stars with no cage of iron or fear between them, and talked about his father, about her sister's loss to an old border skirmish, about the strange, stubborn hope that had grown between them in a jailhouse neither of them had ever expected to find anything but misery in. When we reach my mother's camp, Yash said on the final morning, as they crested the last ridge and saw smoke rising from the hide tents scattered along the shore of a second, smaller lake below, there will be a reckoning. My mother will be furious I broke the betrothal by fleeing. Grosk's clan will demand satisfaction. And you, she glanced at him, and for the first time since the gorge, he saw real fear in her face, not for herself but for him. You are a human who freed an orc prisoner and fled the reach of your own village's law. There is no guarantee my mother's protection will be enough to shield you from either side. I did not come this far to be shielded, Jedediah said. I came to stand beside you when the reckoning comes, whatever shape it takes. Yash reached over and took his hand, right there on the open ridge with the whole camp spread below them, and did not let go for the rest of the walk down. Earthshaker was a tall, broad-shouldered orc woman with gray threading through her dark hair, and a face that had clearly once looked much like her daughter's. weathered now by decades of leading a clan through feud and famine and flood. She rose from beside her fire the moment the camp's outer watchers called word of their approach, and crossed the trampled grass with a speed that belied her age, seizing her daughter by both shoulders and looking her over from head to foot with an intensity that made the whole camp fall silent around them. "You live," Uzga said finally, relief cracking through the sternness in her voice. "I heard you had been taken by human militia. I heard 100 different lies about what became of you." "I live," Yash said, "and I have not come home to be handed to Grosk Ironjaw, mother. Whatever peace you meant to buy with my life, I will find another way to pay it." Uzga's gaze slid past her daughter then, settling on Jedediah with a scrutiny sharp enough to make him stand very straight and very still. "Fletcher," she said slowly, "the fur trader, the son of the man I pulled from the Kelsit flood." "Yes, Chief Mother," Jedediah said, inclining his head with the respect he had learned in 3 years of trading among her people. "I freed your daughter from the human jailhouse at Greylock Landing. I would not see her sold into a marriage she never chose, not while I still had breath and a key in my hand." A murmur ran through the gathered warband at that, low and uncertain, and Uzga's eyes narrowed, flicking between her daughter and the human trader standing so close beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed, close enough that no one watching could mistake it for simple chance. "You have put yourselves both in a great deal of danger for each other," Uzga said, "and you have put my clan in danger besides. Grosk Ironjaw will not simply let this insult pass. He will come with his warband within days, demanding either my daughter's hand or blood in its place." "Then let him come," Yash said, standing tall unbowed, her hand finding Jedediah's again in front of the entire camp. "I will not marry him, mother. Not for peace, not for fear, not for anything. If there is another way to end the feud over the fishing grounds, we will find it, but I will not be the price." Uzga studied her daughter for a long, silent moment, and then slower studied Jedediah again, weighing something in her mind that he could not read. "Your father's debt marker," she said finally, nodding toward the shape of it beneath his shirt. "You still carry it." "I have never taken it off," Jedediah said. "Then you understand," Uzga said, "that a debt of honor once called upon changes what a clan owes and what it may ask in return. You freed my daughter at the risk of your own life and station among your own people. That is no small thing, Fletcher. That is a debt now owed the other way." She turned to address the gathered warriors, her voice rising to carry across the whole camp. "Hear me. The human Fletcher has paid the flood debt of 11 years past, and more besides, at cost to himself. I will not see that repaid with his death at Ironjaw hands, nor my daughter sold against her will to settle a feud that is not hers alone to end." It was not, Jedediah understood, a full solution. It was a chief mother buying time, gathering her people's will before the storm arrived, and the storm arrived 3 days later, exactly as Uzga had predicted. Grosk Ironjaw came to the shore of the Earthshaker camp's lake with 60 warriors at his back, his own broad-shouldered bulk wrapped in dark boiled leather and iron plate, a heavy war axe slung across his back, and the whole camp turned out along the water's edge to watch the confrontation unfold in the open, on the flat trampled grass between the tents and the lake, in full view of every soul present, the kind of moment that would be spoken of at fires for years, however it ended. "Uzga Earthshaker," Grosk called across the space between the two gathered groups, his voice booming. "Your daughter was promised to me before the whole council of elders. I have come to collect what is owed, and I hear she runs with a human dog at her heel now, freed from a cage he had no right to open." "I am not owed like a debt of grain, Grosk Ironjaw," Yash called back before her mother could answer, stepping forward from the line of Earthshaker warriors, Jedediah moving instinctively at her side, though every eye in both warbands turned toward him with open hostility. "I will not marry a man who thinks a woman's worth is measured in the sons she births him. Find another way to end your feud with my clan, or fight me for it yourself, if you think you have the right to claim what I refuse to give." A ripple of shock went through both gathered crowds at the open challenge, and Grosk's face darkened with fury, his hand going to the haft of his axe. "You would challenge me," he said, "over a human." "I would challenge you over myself," Yash said, unflinching, "which was always the truth of it, whether you understand that or not." Grosk's eyes flicked to Jedediah, sizing him up with open contempt. "And the human? Does he hide behind your skirts, or does he answer for stealing what was promised to me?" Jedediah felt every muscle in his body tighten, aware of 60 armed orc warriors watching him, aware that a single wrong word could end in bloodshed on this shore that had already seen too much of it over a scrap of fishing water. "I answer for it," he said, stepping forward, his voice steadier than he felt. "I unlocked her cell because I would rather lose my post, my home, and my life than see a woman I had come to love sold against her will to settle a feud she had no part in starting. If there is a debt to be paid for that, I will pay it, but I will not stand aside while she is handed to you like cargo." The word love, spoken plainly in front of both warbends, seemed to hang in the air longer than any of the challenges before it. Yash turned to look at him, something fierce and open and undone all at once crossing her face, and even Uzga's stern expression flickered with something that might, in a kinder light, have been called approval. "You would fight for her," Grosk said slowly, studying Jedediah now with a different kind of assessment. "A human, unarmored, against a warband of 60. "I would," Jedediah said, and found, to his own surprise, that it was not a lie meant to bluster his way past death, but the plain and simple truth. It was Uzga who stepped forward then, raising a hand before either side could move toward violence. "There is another way to end this, Grosk Ironjaw, if you have wisdom enough to take it instead of pride. The fishing feud began over rights to the northern shoals. My daughter's marriage was always meant to bind our clans through shared blood and shared interest. But there are other ways to bind two clans besides a bride neither wants." She glanced at Jedediah. "This human trades fair goods across both our territories and half a dozen more besides. Through him, a formal trading compact could be struck, granting Ironjaw clan first right to trade the southern pelts through Greylock Landing in exchange for ceding the northern shoals to Earthshaker nets. Wealth for your clan without blood spilled for it, and my daughter remains unmarried to any man she does not choose herself." Grosk was silent a long moment, his warriors murmuring behind him, clearly weighing the promise of steady trade wealth against the cost of a fight that, Jedediah suspected, none of them truly wanted either. "And if I refuse this bargain," Grosk said finally, "and take what was promised by force?" "Then you fight not only my daughter," Uzga said, her voice going hard as flint, "but every warrior standing on the shore behind her, and I promise you, Grosk Ironjaw, you will not enjoy those odds nearly so much as you enjoy threatening a woman who has already told you no." The tension held for one long, breathless moment, 60 warriors on one side, and easily as many on the other, a single word or gesture away from a bloodshed that would echo across the lake country for a generation. Then Grosk's hand slowly fell away from his axe haft, and he spat once on the ground between them, a gesture of disgust rather than surrender, but a stepping back nonetheless. "The trading compact," he said. "I will hear the terms of it, but know this, Earthshaker woman, I will not forget this insult easily." "Nor should you have to," Yash said, unbowed even now. "But you will live to trade fair pelts instead of dying on a shore over a marriage that never should have been decided without me." It took the better part of that week to hammer out the terms of the trading compact, Jedediah spending long hours between the two clan fires translating and negotiating alongside Uzga, drawing on 3 years of honest dealing to bridge a gap that pride alone could never have closed. When it was finally settled, Ironjaw clan granted first right to trade southern pelts through Greylock Landing, with Jedediah himself named as the compact's binding agent, a role that would tie him formally to both clans for years to come. Grosk Ironjaw rode away from the Earthshaker camp without his promised bride, but with a treaty that would fill his clan's stores for winters to come. and something that, if not peace exactly, was at least a truce built on something sturdier than a woman's forced consent. Magistrate Prout, when word finally reached Greylock Landing of what had transpired, carried back by a trapper who had witnessed the standoff from a distant ridge, and could not stop talking about it at every tavern between the lake and the coast, found himself in an unusual position. The Ironjaw bounty he had hoped to collect was gone, but in its place was a trading compact that promised more steady wealth to the village than any single bounty ever could have, secured by the very man he had intended to punish for treason. Jedediah returned to Greylock Landing 3 weeks after the night he unlocked the cell, not in chains as Captain Rourke had sworn he would be, but walking at Yash Earthshaker's side along the same dock where they had fled, both of them wind-burned and travel-worn, and entirely unashamed of the way they stood close together. Prout met them at the jailhouse steps, his face a careful mixture of relief and residual outrage, and looked between the two of them for a long moment before speaking. "You realize," he said finally, "that half this village expected you dead, and the other half expected you hanged." "And the other consideration, magistrate," Jedediah said, holding up the sealed trading compact bearing both Yash Earthshaker's mark and Grosk Ironjaw's, "is that this village now stands to profit more from peace than it ever would have from a bounty." Prout read the compact slowly, his eyebrows climbing higher with each line, and when he finished, he let out a long breath and shook his head. "You have caused me more trouble in 3 weeks, Fletcher, than any man in this village in the last 10 years. "I am aware," Jedediah said. "Yet," Prout said, glancing once meaningfully at Yash, who stood with her arms crossed and her chin high, entirely unbothered by his scrutiny, "I find myself unable to argue with the results. There was no formal pardon offered that day, nor punishment either, only a kind of tacit understanding, born of profit and exhaustion in equal measure, that Jedediah Fletcher would remain the binding agent of a compact too valuable to jeopardize by prosecuting the man who had made it possible. It was not justice exactly, but in the Lake Country, Jedediah had learned, peace rarely arrived wearing justice's face. It came instead in whatever practical shape kept the fewest people bleeding, and he had made his peace with that a long time ago. What mattered more to him, standing on that dock with the whole village watching and whispering, was the woman beside him who had chosen, again and again, across a burning gorge and a jailhouse cage, and a council fire surrounded by armed warriors, to stay. They did not return to live in Greylock Landing itself. The wounds of that first flight were still too fresh among certain corners of the village, and Yash, for all her courage, had no wish to spend her days under the watchful, wary eyes of people who had caged her once already. Instead, they built a life on the quiet shore where the Earthshaker camp met the trading routes Jedediah had walked for years, a low timber cabin raised with the help of Yash's clan kin, close enough to the docks that his trading trips grew shorter and less lonely, close enough to the lake that the water was always the last sound he heard before sleep. It was there, on a warm evening some months after the standoff on Grosk Ironjaw's shore, that Jedediah found her standing at the edge of the water at dusk, the sky above the lake gone the color of a ripe plum, the first stars just beginning to prick through, and something in the stillness of her posture told him she had been waiting for him specifically. "You are thinking too hard again," he said, coming to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I can hear it from the cabin." Yash smiled, the small, private smile she had once been so reluctant to show and now gave freely, only to him. "I am thinking that I never once, in all my life before that jailhouse cell, believed I would choose a mate for myself rather than have one chosen for me by council fires and clan debts." She turned to face him fully, the last light catching the amber of her eyes, the scar above her brow, the strong, sure lines of a woman who had held both their lives above a gorge on the strength of one arm and never once regretted it. "And now I find I would choose you again, every day in every version of this life, human and orc feud and burning bridge and all." "You already have," Jedediah said, his voice rough with feeling. Every day since that first night. You chose to talk me into leaving that cell door open, when you could have chosen 100 other safer men to try it on. You chose me. I chose you, Yash agreed, closing the last distance between them, her hands framing his face the way they had that first night in the shallow cave above the river. Because you looked at a caged orc woman on your very first night of guard duty, and instead of fear, all I saw in your eyes was a man deciding, right then, that he wanted to know me properly. That is a rarer thing than you understand, Jedediah Fletcher. Rarer than any debt marker, rarer than any peace treaty. I will not waste it. She kissed him then, slow and certain, with none of the desperate urgency of that first night in the cave, but something deeper settled beneath it. A claiming freely given and freely met. And Jedediah felt the whole weight of every lonely trading season, every solitary winter. Every year he had spent believing himself destined to walk through the world unattached and unwanted, finally lift and drift away over the quiet water like mist burning off in morning sun. They stood together at the edge of the lake as the last light failed and the stars came out fully overhead, the whole vast open sky arching above the water, no cage or council fire or warband standing between them now. Only the two of them and the world falling quietly away around the shape of what they had chosen to become to each other. "Stay with me," Yash murmured against his mouth, her hand sliding down to rest over his heart. "Not because a debt demands it, not because a treaty requires it, but because you want to, the way I want you, entirely and without condition, for as long as either of us draws breath. I have never wanted anything so completely in my whole life," Jedediah said, and gathered her close beneath the open sky, the lake water lapping soft and steady against the shore, the two of them finally, fully, unshakably found. Later, much later, when the fire in the little timber cabin had burned down to embers, and the night outside had gone fully dark and quiet over the water, Jedediah would think back on that first night in the jailhouse, on the iron bars and the lantern light, and the fierce, unafraid woman who had reached through the gap to seize his wrist before he had even decided whether to be afraid of her. And he would understand, more clearly with every season that passed, that some debts were never meant to be repaid in coin or pelts or treaties at all. Some debts were meant to be repaid in exactly the way he had repaid this one, with a key turned in a lock in the dead of night, with a hand reaching back across a burning gorge, with a whispered confession in the dark that had changed the whole shape of both their lives. Yash Earthshaker had come to Greylock Landing a prisoner, promised against her will to a man she despised, caged behind iron bars in a jailhouse she had every reason to hate. She left it in the end exactly as she had always insisted she would, unbroken, unbought, and entirely her own to give, choosing, out of every path open to her, the quiet fur trader who had looked at her without flinching on the very first night and never once stopped looking at her the same way since. And Jedediah Fletcher, who had spent so many long years believing himself destined to walk the trading roads alone, learned at last what it meant to be chosen, not out of debt, not out of desperation, but freely, fiercely, and completely, by a woman who feared nothing in this world except the possibility of losing him, and who had decided from that very first rattling of iron bars in lantern light that she never intended to let that happen. The lake country went on much as it always had, docks creaking under fishermen's boots, trading boats crossing the quiet water twice a day, the old feud between Earthshaker and Iron Joe clans settling slowly into the steadier, less bloody rhythm of trade and treaty. But down at the timber cabin on the quiet shore, where a fur trader and an orc warrior had built a life neither of them had ever expected to find, something rarer than peace had taken root and held a love earned across burning bridges and jailhouse bars alike, chosen freely, and never once regretted, not for a single day that followed.